long before kingdoms rose and great cities were built. There was a valley known as Wening Tirta. The valley lay between mist-covered mountains and a river that flowed throughout the year. Every morning began with the songs of birds. Mist slowly drifted over the rice fields. Water flowed through small irrigation channels into the villagers' farmlands. Deer emerged from the forest at dawn. Fish were still plentiful in the river. The people lived simple lives. They farmed. They fished. They gathered only what they needed from the forest. Neither too much nor too little. They believed that nature was not something to be conquered, but something to be understood. In that valley, a boy named Yatmika was born. His father was the keeper of the irrigation waterways. His mother was a bamboo weaving artisan. They lived simply, just like the other villagers. From an early age, Yatmika was known for his diligence and friendly nature. Yet there was one thing that made him different. While other children played until dusk, Yatmika would often sit by the riverbank, watching the water flow into the distance. He always wanted to know what lay beyond the mountains, what existed downstream along the river, what could be found beyond the valley. Day after day passed. Seasons came and went. The rice turned golden and was harvested. The rains arrived and then gave way to the dry season. And before anyone realized it, time had shaped Yatmika into a young man admired by many people. One day, a group of hunters discovered a shimmering stone on the mountainside. It turned out to be gold. The discovery of gold gradually became a topic of conversation among hunters, farmers, and travelers who passed through Wening Tirta from word to word. The news followed the river's flow and the travel, routes that connected the valley to distant lands. There was not much of it, but it was enough to attract merchants from other regions. Boats began to arrive. The markets grew busier. Villages expanded. Yatmika, known for his wisdom and ability to unite people, was eventually chosen to lead the valley. Not because he came from a noble bloodline, but because he had earned the trust of the people. Under his leadership, irrigation channels were repaired, roads were widened, markets flourished, harvests became more abundant. The people lived in greater prosperity than ever before. At that time, everyone felt that the future was smiling upon them. Year after year passed. Prosperity continued to grow. And with that prosperity came new desires. At first, they were simple. Yet Mika wanted to build a larger marketplace. Then, a bigger warehouse. Then, longer roads. Everything seemed reasonable. Everything brought benefits. There was nothing wrong with it. There was nothing evil about it. Yet, without anyone realizing it, the desire to have enough slowly became the desire to have more. And the desire to be known gradually became the desire to be remembered. One season, the birds began migrating earlier than usual. Deer became increasingly rare to see. At times, the river water turned cloudy even when no rain had fallen. The mist lingered longer than it once did. The village elders noticed these changes. They felt that something was shifting. Not in the mountains. Not in the river. But in the relationship between people and both of them. Yet the voices of the elders were gradually drowned out by the excitement of a city that continued to grow. As the tower neared completion, strange things began to happen. Hunters became lost in forests they had known since childhood. Mist appeared in the middle of the day. The birds no longer sang in the morning. Fish grew increasingly scarce. The wind would often stop blowing without reason. The nights felt quieter. Far too quiet. Yet the city continued to celebrate. For the voice of grandeur was louder than the voice of warning. More and more gold was discovered. Magnificent structures began to rise. Stone walls replaced wood. Roofs were adorned with gleaming metal. People from many regions came to trade. Wening Tirta Valley transformed into the greatest city the region had ever known. The people were proud. Yet Mika was proud. Everyone felt they were witnessing the birth of a golden age. Yet, at the very same time, they began to forget the voice of the river that had once nurtured them. One day, Yatmika announced the construction of a tower taller than any ever built by human hands, from the top of a hill. Yatmika often gazed upon the city that continued to grow beneath him. He saw bustling markets, increasingly crowded roads, and houses multiplying with each passing season. Yet, for the first time, his success no longer brought him the sense of peace it once had. A question had begun to grow within his heart, one he had never considered before. When I am gone, will all of this still remember me? Somewhere within his thoughts, an idea began to take shape. A tower. A tower. A monument unlike anything the world had ever seen. And so, Yatmika announced its construction. The tower began to rise. Driven by his ambition, he sought to build the tallest structure humanity had ever known. He wanted the city to be remembered for all time. He wanted his name to outlive his own life. Some of the people cheered. Others celebrated the grand vision. But the elders remained silent, for they saw something within Yatmika that they no longer recognized. Not wisdom, but ambition. At last, the tower was completed. Its peak pierced the layer of mist that had long lingered around the mountaintops. That night, a great celebration was held. Music filled the streets of the city. Torches burned everywhere. But high upon the mountain, the mist began to descend. Slowly, calmly, without a sound. As though something that had been waiting for a very long time had finally begun its journey. When the mist entered the city, no one immediately felt afraid, for mist had always been a part of their lives. But this mist was different. It did not disappear as dawn approached. It continued to descend, swallowing the roads, swallowing the markets, swallowing the palace, swallowing the tower. It was then that some people began to realize that they had spent so much time building things higher and higher, that they had forgotten to notice what was slowly disappearing beneath their feet. But that realization came too late. Far too late. The sun slowly rose from behind the mountains. Dew still clung to the tips of the wild grass. The river flowed as it had the day before. Birds once again crossed the sky. There was no sign that anything had happened. Yet the people who came down from the surrounding villages stopped at the edge of the valley. They stood in silence. Before them, there was no city, no palace, no marketplace, no tower that had, for years, been the pride of humankind. All that remained was empty land, wild growths, and a few ancient stones covered in the morning dew. No one spoke. For there were no words capable of explaining what they were seeing. Some tried to remember where the city gates had stood, where the palace had stood, where the tower had stood. But the longer they tried to remember, the more blurred those images became in their minds, as though the mist that had descended the night before had not only carried away the buildings, but had also taken part of the memory of them. The morning breeze drifted gently through the valley, stirring the wild grass. Nothing more. Nothing less. The mountains still stood. The river still flowed. The forest still breathed. Nature was not sorrowful. Nature was not joyful. It had simply returned to being itself. And for the first time, people realized something they had long forgotten. That they were not the owners of the valley. They were merely guests who had once passed through it. Years later, children born after the event would often ask the elders, "Was it true that a golden city once stood in that place?" The elders would only gaze toward the mist descending from the mountains, then answer softly, "We do not know for certain. What we do know is that something once stood there, and that something became too proud to remember where it came from." Then they would fall silent again. listening to the sound of the water, listening to the sound of the wind, listening to time as it continued to move forward. Because sometimes legends are not left behind to be remembered, but to keep people from repeating the same mistakes. When the sun rose, the city was gone. There were no ruins, no more debris, no traces of destruction. Only the valley, the grass, the river, the mountains, and a thin veil of mist slowly fading with the morning light. Nature had returned to silence, as though nothing had ever happened. Yet for those who had witnessed it, something remained behind. Not the city, not the gold, not the tower, but the feeling that humanity had once been so consumed by the pursuit of greatness that it forgot it had lived from the very beginning, through the generosity of the same valley, and among the sound of the ever-flowing river, beneath the shadow of the mountains that still stood. The legend continued to live on, not to be remembered, but so that one day, when ambition once again grows taller than wisdom, people may realize it sooner. Before the mist descends for a second time,